Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of June of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with massive missile and drone strike that took place during the previous night between the 5th and the 6th of June of 2025. That was the biggest strike ever since the beginning of the special military operation. The Russians used hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles. The Ukrainians today provided their own information regarding the work of their air defense. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians launched 407 drones, 199 were brought down by missiles by air defense systems, and around 169 were probably intercepted by Ukrainian warfare equipment. Also, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians used 39 missiles and 32 of them were brought down by Ukraine air defense. And the most important is that Ukrainians reported that they managed to destroy every single Iskander missile that was launched by the Russians. So the numbers are very interesting and the numbers are impressive when talking about the effectiveness of the work of Ukraine air defense. But saying the truth, I'm not sure that the Ukrainians provided us correct information, because when talking about different scenes, different videos that we got during the day, it seems that the Russian missiles and drones were a bit more effective than Ukrainians reported. This is the map that you can see in front of your screens, is the map of the roads of Russia's attacks during the previous night. As you can see, the Russians attacked the eastern part of Ukraine mainly with drones. The northern part of Ukraine was attacked by cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and drones as well. And when talking about the western part of Ukraine, the Russians attacked this territory mainly with drones and cruise missiles. And let's discuss videos once again. The Ukrainians are saying that they managed to destroy almost every single missile and drone that was launched by the Russians. But saying the truth, the videos that we got during the previous 24 hours give us completely different situation. For example, in this video we can see the consequences of another attack, and here we can see the secondary detonation. According to this video, it seems that the Russians managed to destroy some warehouse or ammo depot, and then there was a secondary detonation and very heavy explosion. Obviously, we can't judge the work of Ukraine air defense based just on this video, but obviously this is very strange and weird video that the Russians attacked the central part of Kiev without any resistance from the Ukraine air defense. Okay, when talking about Kiev, it's not just it's not the most important. When talking about the western part of Ukraine, here we got the biggest number of videos. The Russians were bombing and attacking the city of Ternopil. In this video we can see how the Russians, as a result of attack, managed to destroy something like a mall, probably mall, or some warehouse or ammo depot where the Ukrainians were storing weapons or something like this. Very heavy explosions, a huge fire that the Russians attacked this territory somewhere in the late nights between the 5th and the 6th of June of 2025. But when talking about the western part of Ukraine, the Russians were bombing this territory probably for 5 or 6 hours, because we got video when there was just deep dark night, and we got videos from the same area when there was already morning, so the sunlight or something like this. So the Russians were attacking this territory for a very long period of time. And by the way, today, this evening of the 6th of June of 2025, we received first reports that the Russians brought additional aircrafts to the territory of different airfields of the Russian Federation, and the Russians began probably relaunching their arms, missiles, probably re-giving additional missiles to aircrafts, and most likely the Russians are planning to repeat this massive missile and drone strike during the upcoming night. And of course, the most important video and the most impressive video is coming from the city of Lutsk. In this video, we can see not just Russian missile strike, but we can see also complete absence of Ukraine air defense. Just in this video, we can count up to 4 strikes during just probably 1 minute. This is the first attack. Few seconds later, we got another strike of Russian cruise missile, then another strike, and on the final moment of this video, we can see force attack, force missiles without any probably barriers, without any resistance from Ukrainian air defense system. And once again, as I have noted this during the previous video, I would like to repeat this once again. For the first time since for the previous 2 years, Poland hasn't raised their aircrafts in the field just to support Ukraine. Usually, probably during the previous 2 years, every time when the Russians were attacking the western part of Ukraine, Polish authorities raised their F-16s with the purpose to keep them in the sky in case if Russian missiles cross the border, they could be intercepted by Polish F-16s. But today, Polish authorities decided not to do this, and this is very important, and this shows that currently there is a very huge and big conflict between Ukrainians and Polish authorities. Anyway, let's continue. Let's discuss another important topic. I would like to talk with you about exchange of bodies of the fallen soldiers. You know that for the previous year and during this year, we got lots of episodes when the Russians and the Ukrainians were exchanging with the prisoners of war. And usually when talking about prisoners of war, we see the same exchange. The Russians return 250 Ukrainians and the Ukrainians return usually 250 Russians. But when talking about bodies, we can see completely different picture, and that was very strange and weird to me, because usually when talking about any exchange of bodies of the fallen soldiers, Ukraine, let's say, usually returns around, let's say, 50 bodies. The Russians usually return 600 or 700 bodies. And you know that there were always talks and rumors, and some experts and probably people were saying that due to this ratio of return of dead bodies, we can judge about the losses between the Russian and the Ukrainian side. And I was always wondering why there is so huge gap between these two numbers, why the Russians always return 700 or 800 bodies and the Ukrainians just 50 or 40 bodies. It was very difficult to understand, and sometimes I thought that maybe indeed this is the exact ratio of losses between the Russians and the Ukrainians. But today everything became clear when the Russians proposed to return Ukrainians 6,000 bodies of Ukrainian soldiers. Most of them were killed during the battle for the Sumo region, so in the Kursk offensive operation that was carried out by the Ukrainians. And the main reason of this is the economical reason. According to raw estimation, according to different experts, if Russia returns Ukrainian 6,000 bodies, then Ukrainians would be forced to pay to their relatives up to a little bit more than $2 billion, and this huge money. So this is the reason why the Russians were returning so many bodies to Ukraine. It was something like economical attack on Ukrainian economy. By the way, I'll remind you that several days ago, Ukraine was recognized as a bankrupt because Ukraine hasn't paid for it probably some papers, according to information we have, it happened several days ago. Yes, Ukraine issue rating lowered to D as DFC ratings, and so some different numbers. So S&P announced Ukraine's default on GDP warrants. So that happened yesterday or during the previous day. So basically, Ukraine is already a bankrupt, and this is the reason. And this is, let's say, another strike in this area when the Russians are trying to worsen the situation, because obviously, if Ukrainians accept these 6,000 bodies, they would be forced to pay to their relatives pensions, different payments, social payments, including money like several hundred millions of Ukrainian currency of hryvnia to these people. So it's once again, as we discussed, more than 2 billion, and Ukraine doesn't have right now all this money. So this is very interesting situation, and Russian attempt to probably to make the situation in Ukraine even worse than it is already. Anyway, the Russians during the previous 24 hours carried out their own attack all over the entire territory of Ukraine. We discussed roads, we discussed videos and so on, and the Ukrainians from their side tried to counterattack, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians attacked the airfield at the city of Bryansk. We have several photos and pictures from this area. We don't have video to confirm whether it's true or just a deep fake. We don't know for sure, but Ukrainians are saying that as a result of this attack, several helicopters of the armed force of the Russian Federation were destroyed. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, we know that Ukrainians also attacked the city of Engels, the city where Russians keep their strategical bombers that they use to attack deep inside of the territory. So to attack Ukraine, the Russians are using this airfield. And today we got several pictures and videos exactly from this area. The Ukrainians are saying that as a result of drone strikes, several constructions and facilities were damaged and destroyed. So this is the situation. Once again, according to information we have, the Russians currently regrouping, and most likely they will repeat their massive missile strike and drone strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine in upcoming hours. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. And that's it about the situation in the air, about missile strikes. And now let's talk about the situation on the ground. And first, let's talk about the Sumo direction, because we got very interesting updates. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. According to information we have, the Russians finished the battle for the settlement of Nikolaevka, Nova Nikolaevka. This information was confirmed by several pro-Russian resources, but as of the end of the 6th of June, we haven't received any confirmation from the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, we got the video from the settlement of Constantinovka, and here we can see how several Russian soldiers raised Russian flag in the central part of the settlement. Based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything because we colored the village of Konstantinovka a few days ago when the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported about complete control over this territory. And we got another very important video published by the Ukrainian sources. This video was published by the units of the 95th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. And here we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking Russian soldiers along tree lines in different positions in the Sumo direction. And this episode, one of the episodes of this video, took place exactly in this area. So based on this video, we came to the conclusion that everything behind this point is already under complete Russian control. Based on this video, we made small adjustments to the northeast of the settlement of Loknya. Now we see that the Russians most likely are trying to outflank the settlement of Yunakiivka from the east and to increase the pressure. You know that the Russians during the previous days managed to improve their positions, but telling the truth, we haven't received almost anything during the previous 3 days. So the Russians were showing us huge progress probably 4 or 5 days ago, but when talking about the previous 3 days, the Russians improved their positions, but we see that their dynamic became less in comparison with the previous days of offensive. When talking about the settlement of Tyotkina, the Ukrainians continue pressure on the village, bombing and attacking this area, trying to reduce the city till ruins. The Ukrainians are not going to give up. We see that they're planning to establish complete control. They are tasked to do this without any other option. So that is why we continue receiving lots of videos, but from the Russian side, we can say that they hold their positions and the Russians are not going to give up as well. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Coupens direction. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian logistic. And this is the first video from the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Achimovka. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians most likely managed to restore their Pontoon bridge or some river crossing that was later destroyed by the Russian Ha-38 missile, which means that most likely the Russians are planning to increase their pressure here. First, they destroy logistic, now they can move further on the ground. When talking about the northern Coupens direction itself, during the previous 24 hours, we got lots of very important videos. And the same story, the Russians destroyed another bridge in this area that connected the western and the eastern bank of the river Voskol in the vicinity of the city by the name of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. So this is very important video, but not the most important. We have very important video from the settlement of Kondrashevka. And here we can see how 2 Russian soldiers raised their flags in the central part of the settlement of the village. And you know that this is a very important video because the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported about complete control over the settlement of Kondrashevka 3 or 4 or 5 days ago. And based on this video, based on the report of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation several days ago, we adjusted the map in the Russian favor. But the thing is that when the Russians reported about complete control over the settlement, nobody believed them. And there were several pro-Russian resources that reported that there were still clashes, that the Russians probably managed to approach the village by didn't capture it, and many other different statements. So that is why the Russians today published proofs that confirm Russian complete control over this territory. So once again, now we have both the report of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, we have confirmation from different sources, and we have video. We have a video where we can see Russian flags in the most central part. But the Russians are not going to move further. Yes, of course, they will try to improve their positions, but the Russians are not going to enter the city of Coupens right now. As for the next target, we believe that the Russians will try to cut the eastern pocket, the territory between the villages of Sinkovka and the settlement of Pishana. This is very big distances. You know that if the Russians decide to move further in the southern direction, the Russians would be forced to do this without any support of Russian artillery, because Russian artillery is going to be too far from this area. So that is why we believe, and due to this number of geolocations that we got from the most eastern part of this pocket, we believe that the Russians first of all are going to cut the pocket. This will allow allow the Russians to bring as close as possible their short-range artillery to the line of combat contact, and then the Russians will be able to establish complete fire control over supply roads over the city of Coupens itself, and this will allow the Russians stormtroopers to advance on the territory of the city itself. So as you can see, we have geolocations, lots of geolocations. We expect that the Russians first will try to take this pocket under complete control, and only then the Russians will attack. Because now Ukrainians can keep their forces, their artillery forces in the vicinity of Grushovka, and Ukrainians can attack Russians in the area of Kondrashevka without any problems from the Russian side. So that is why the Russians first need to bring their artillery systems closer, and then they will be able to attack the city of Kupiansk and Ukrainian positions further in the western direction. Now let's talk about the Leman area. During the previous 24 hours, we have lots of important updates and we have changes on the ground. I'll remind you that according to information we have, yesterday the Russians managed to take the village of Zelena Dolina and Pincers from the north, and the Russians managed to cut main supply lines from the south. So that was already a cauldron created by the Russians yesterday, and today we got additional geolocations that confirm Russian progress on the ground. This video was published by the Ukrainians of the 60th Mechanized Brigade, where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in different places around the settlement of Zelena Dolina. And based on this video, based on two episodes that were geolocated during this video, this is the first one and this is the second place, we adjusted the map, and now we have no doubts that indeed the Russians continue offensive operation further, and the Russians are going to attack the settlement of Shindrigalov at least from the northeast, and from the east. But first task of the Russians is to secure Zelena Dolina, and then they will proceed further. Now let's talk about the city of Civer, because according to a number of geolocations and type of geolocations we got, we believe that the Russians are about to finish the preparation before the beginning of the final battle for the settlement of Siversk itself. The most important video is coming from the most southern part of the settlement. Here we can see a bridge, a Ukrainian bridge under Ukrainian control. Obviously this bridge was mined by the Ukrainians in case if Russians begin offensive, and if the Russians are able to break through, Ukrainians would destroy the bridge immediately. But as for the 6th of June, the Ukrainians still had possibilities to use this bridge for supply and support of their contingent to the east of the city of Siversk. But today the Russians decided to destroy this bridge, and as a result of this FPV drone attack, the bridge was damaged as a result of detonation and explosion, and the bridge was completely destroyed. So in this video we can see exactly this moment, and probably in the final part of this video we can see the consequences of this explosion. So the bridge was destroyed, the logistic was ruined in this area. Obviously this is not the only logistic road that Ukrainians had in this area, but obviously this will ease the Russian progress on the ground in the very near future. So due to this video of explosion of the bridge, and due to significant number of icons of FPV drone attacks and artillery strikes in this direction, we expect that during the next 72 hours the Russians will make first attempts to attack the city of Siversk from the south and from the southeast and from the east. And as we discussed in the previous videos, the most important task of the Russians just to answer the city of Siversk and to dig in deeper. If the Russians are able to take under control several blocks or micro districts of the city of Siversk or villages around, this is going to be already the beginning of the fall of Ukrainian defense in this area as well. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Konstantinovka, where the Russians intensified their offensive operation. Where the Russians started this process several days ago. The most important updates are coming from the Terias direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and according to fresh geolocations, we see that the Russians are about to finish the battle for the southern Fedorivka. We have this video where Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians in the most northern part, but on the Russian side of the railways, and we have this, video that confirms Ukrainian presence on the Ukrainian side of the railways in the area of the railway station. The Russians were bombing this territory with artillery strikes and mortar strikes, and we have this icon that shows that the Russians managed to establish complete control over this tree line, which means that Ukrainians who are currently located on the territory of this company, stronghold company, trenches were captured, were encircled by the Russians from the north and from the west. Most likely the Ukrainians still have some corridor for evacuation. We're talking about this territory between these three lines in the vicinity of this lake, but obviously it is already very dangerous to use this road during the night period of time, and obviously it's impossible to use this road for evacuation during the daylight. So due to this configuration of the front line, we expect that Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from this area during the upcoming night, and probably tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information as well. When talking about the Kleban-Byksky pocket itself, the Russians continue their offensive, and the most important update is coming from the settlement of Zarya. Today, pro-Ukrainian mappers from the Deep State team confirmed that the Russians established complete control over the territory of Zarya, and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back completely. Most likely tomorrow, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm this information. At the same time, the Russians intensified their offensive operation on the western part of the settlement of Yablunovka, and during the first 24 hours, the Russians managed to take under control additional strongholds, 2 lines and buildings on the territory of the village itself. So the news around Ukraine positions is tightening and tightening every single day. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 5th of June of 2025, and this is the situation by the end of the 6th of June. Additional buildings, structures and streets were taken by the Russians. Currently, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the most western part of the settlement of Yablunovka and the central part of the settlement itself. I'll remind you that the main purpose and the task of the Russians is to establish complete control over everything that is located, let's say, to the west and to the south of this red line. So this pocket, this territory, the Russians are trying to establish control over. This will allow the Russians to cut the road N20, and this will lead to the situation when the Ukrainians from this pocket, from the settlements of Sherbinovka, Novospask, Katerinovka, Kleban-Byk itself, would be forced to use just one road for evacuation, supply and support, the road of 522 that goes from the settlement of Kleban-Byk in the northern directions towards the city of Coupens. But the problem is for the Ukrainians, the main problem for the Ukrainians is that currently the Russians are trying to advance along the railways in the north-western direction as well, with the purpose to get as close as possible to this supply road and to cut this road probably even physically to the north. So the Russians are trying to create another corridor in this direction, and most likely this is going to happen, obviously not today, not tomorrow, but in 2-3 weeks, most likely we're going to see this configuration of the front line, and Ukrainians would be forced to fall back, or they will be forced to cross the Kleban-Byksky reservoir itself, but highly unlikely they're going to do this. When talking about N32 roads, the most important thing is that the Russians continue their offensive operation to the next defense line. The most important that the Russians managed to secure this pocket at least for 50% according to neutral mappers. This is very important advance on the ground. As soon as the Russians finish the battle for this pocket, then they will have no barriers in front of them to offensive operation, to carry out offensive operation further in the western direction towards the settlement of Novoekonomichna and Nikolaevka. And most likely, and according to all updates we have, most likely the Russians are going to do this. The settlement of Novoekonomichna is the next target of the armed force of the Russian Federation. When talking about the Novopavlovka direction, Dnipro direction and the South Donetsk direction, the Russians resumed their offensive, and the Russians are attacking Ukrainians with probably biggest pressure ever. According to information we have, the Russians managed to secure for 60 or 70% the settlement of Novosergeyevka. This information was confirmed by several neutral mappers. The village is about to be taken, and the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation most likely will confirm this information very soon. Pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians once again managed to shorten the distance to the border with the Dnipro region, and the pro-Ukrainians reported that currently the distance between possible edge positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation and the border itself is less than 1 kilometer. The Ukrainians are saying that just 600 meters are in front of the Russians in this area. The most important updates from this direction is coming from the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to break through Ukraine defense belt and to establish complete control over the settlement of Fedorivka and to answer the village of Komar. So let's start from the beginning, and first let's talk about the village of Fedorivka. During the previous 24 hours, we got 4 or 5 videos from this area. First, there were videos of heavy artillery preparation when the Russians were basically reducing the village of Fedorivka till ruins. Then we got videos how the Russians were moving through the village with infantry and stormtroopers, and by the end of the 6th of June of 2025 we got another video where we can see how Russians were raising their flags on the territory of the village in different parts. For example, in this very moment we can see how Russians raised the Russian flag on the territory of farms to the northwest of the settlement of Fedorivka. In the next episode we can see how Russians raised their flag in the most northern part of the village itself. So when talking about the map, let's return to the map. The first flag was raised in this point, the second one was raised in this area. Based on this video we have adjusted the map of Fedorivka completely in Russian favor. Furthermore, the same thing, different mappers made the same. So the village of Fedorivka was colored completely in Russian favor according to the most of the mappers. But when talking about the Ukrainian side, they're showing us completely different picture, and this picture is also very interesting. So according to most of the mappers, the Russians were attacking the village of Fedorivka from the south by moving step by step in the northern direction, taking one position after another. But the Ukrainian sources are saying that this attack was carried out completely different way. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians were attacking the village of Fedorivka and Komar from the village of Dnieproenergia along this tree line. So this red line with arrows is approximately the pass in the road of Russian attack. So the first Russian group entered the southeastern part of the settlement of Komar and digged in deeper. The main purpose of this attack was to secure the northern flank, while another group of Russian forces would cross the river of Mokre Yaly from the east and enter the northern part of the settlement of Fedorivka. From these positions, first the Russians established complete control over the southern part of the northern Fedorivka, and then two more groups moved in the northwestern direction. The first one took place control over the farms, and the second group took control over the northeastern part of Fedorivka. So these are approximately the roads of Russian attack according to pro-Ukrainian sources. According to them, the southern part of Fedorivka and the northern part of the settlement of Veselaya are still in the gray zone or under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Anyway, we can see that the Russians, the pro-Russians and the pro-Ukrainians show us completely two different approaches of this offensive operation, but telling the truth, I believe that currently it doesn't matter, because even if the Russians haven't established complete control over the Fedorivka, obviously we understand that this is going to happen in the near future. And even if the Ukrainians control the southern part of Fedorivka, now they are forced to move in the western direction towards these tree lines with the purpose to escape the encirclement. And when talking about Fedorivka, everything is clear to me. But when talking about Komar, these Ukrainian adjustments on the map is very interesting. According to this configuration, the Russians managed to enter the settlement of Novokomar. And not just enter, because we see not just the gray zone in this area, we see the territories that were colored completely in Russian favor, which means that the Russians both entered the village of Komar and managed to dig in deeper and to create a very strong positions in this side. So this is very important, because if the Russians manage to achieve these results, most likely the Russians would continue. And probably we can start counting days before the Russians will establish complete control over this territory. So we have several updates from the Zaporozhye direction. As we discussed in the previous video, the Russians launched their offensive in the direction of the village of Malinovka. So we covered massive missile strike, we covered the situation on the ground, and now I would like to discuss with you another very important topic, the military campaign of 2026. Today we got a very interesting article published by Geopolitical. The next year, Russia plans to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. The publication quotes that the deputy head of Zelensky office Palka. He claims that the Russian armed forces plan to complete the taking under control of LPR, DPR, Zaporozhye, Kherson directions by the fall and by winter, and to create buffer zone along the border. And the next plans and the plans for the next year, in his opinion, are even more ambitious, to take the entire left bank of the Dnieper, the Odessa and Nikolaev regions. So this is the plan according to Politico and according to Ukrainian authorities. So this is very interesting, and of course this might be just a regular speculation, but telling the truth, a day ago we got another very interesting article from the Transnistria. According to the Financial Times, Odessa under threat, Russia wants to deploy 10,000 troops in Transnistria. There are currently about 1,500 Russian troops in Transnistria, and if a government loyal to Moscow comes to power, Russia will be able to officially station 10,000 troops there. So these are the statement, this is the article that we got from the Financial Times. And obviously these two articles are very close to each other, because according to the previous article of Politico, the Russians are planning to attack this area, and the Financial Times gave us report how exactly the Russians are going to do this. And now, of course, the most important question, of course, it's very beautiful articles on the papers, but very important question, how exactly the Russians are going to do this. And today probably we got an answer to this question, because today, according to information we have, the mission accomplished, the PMC Wagner returns home. So according to information we have, PMC Wagner is returning back to the Russian Federation. Obviously, they're not going to Russia itself. Obviously, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation have already found a next task and mission for them. And most likely, and if this operation about Odessa and Nikolaev is going to happen, obviously this is going to happen with the combination of these three articles. The entire operation in this part, the situation with the Transnistria, and most likely with involvement of the PMC Wagner. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.